Good morning to everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the Colonial Secretary's Papers, 1788 to 1825. In the spirit of reconciliation, New South Wales State Archives acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders today. So in this session today, we're going to look a little bit at the role of the Colonial Secretary and why it's such an important office and why the records are so important to us today. Then we're going to look at the papers from 1788 to 1825 and then how to find them. And our big announcement, which is that we've put a digitised copy of those 1788 to 1825 papers into our catalogue collection search, and that you can search them through collection search as well. So we're very, very excited about this. So what we've got here is just a picture of the Colonial Secretary's building, later the Chief Secretary's building. This wasn't designed until 1869 and it wasn't built till 1873 and finally finished in 1886. It's on Macquarie Street across the road from the Governor's Government House and the gates to Government House. So it just gives you that sense in the later 19th century of the grandeur and the importance of the Colonial Secretary's office. So prior to this building being built, so in the early part of the 19th century, you've got to imagine that most government departments, including the Colonial Secretary, were located in a number of buildings around Sydney. Some of those buildings were hired out and some were still housed in domestic buildings constructed in the earliest days of the colony. So prior to this building being built, everything was a little bit of a hodgepodge. But in the later part of the 19th century, we do get this building that just reflects the importance of this office. So we'll start at that point. Very important office. Now, just thinking about why the Colonial Secretary's records are important for family historians and other historians, and people generally, really. So from the beginning of the settlement in New South Wales by the British, the governor was responsible for almost all the aspects of the lives of the inhabitants of Botany Bay. So the governors did things like regulate the supply of rations, granted land, allotted convicts to those who could employ them. They assisted settlers, established government stores, fixed prices of commodities, fixed the rate of wages and the hours of labour. They imposed tolls and duties. They gave and withdrew licences to trade, established and controlled the markets, fixed interest rates, and all that kind of stuff was done by the governor. And when Governor Phillip arrived, he didn't actually have a secretary to keep his records for him. So he started by arranging for someone to perform that role of secretary to the governor. And over time, this role of secretary to the governor evolved into the colonial secretary that we know from the later in the century. So this office of the colonial secretary was the channel of communications between the governor and other government officers and private settlers, especially before 1856. So even by 1804, Governor King said that the Secretary has custody of all the official papers and records belonging to the colony, transcribed the public dispatches, marked out all the grants, leases and other colonial instruments, took care of the convict indents and other lists sent with the convicts with their terms of conviction and every other official transaction relating to the colony and the government. And then also received correspondence from convicts and settlers, ranging from petitions to mitigation of sentence to a request for land. So it's a really important office, and most people, when they wanted something from the government or had some transaction with the government, would have had to have dealt with the Colonial Secretary's office at some stage. And we're very lucky that particularly after 1910, the records have survived fairly well. So we have a reasonable quantity of records from this office and they're kept in reasonable order. So that's why it's such an important core set of colonial records. So when we go to look for the Colonial Secretary's records, we often start with the information on our website. The website is records.nsw.gov.au, and what I've got here is a screenshot from the home page. So Harbour Bridge up the top. And as we scroll down the page there, I've circled a button that says Colonial Secretary. So that's on the left-hand side at the bottom of your screen. So if you click on that button there, you will get to all of our guides, now indexes and stories that relate to the Colonial Secretary's records. So we have an overview to the office. So it's like a summary of the history of the record of the office and the kinds of records you can find. The Colonial Secretary's Guide is a more in-depth listing of the records that we've got and a really in-depth detailed history of the Colonial Secretary's office. For example, if you look at the grey bar across the top there, you can see one of the options is indexes. And if you clicked on that, you would go to our Colonial Secretary's indexes. Now, just a word about the papers between 1788 and 1825. So in 1988, to mark the bicentenary, the Colonial Secretary's papers between 1788 and 1825 were microfilmed and indexed. So these papers included letters received, memorials and petitions, and those are really letters again, but they're people writing to the Colonial Secretary to ask for something, like a mitigation of sentence, like a grant of land, that kind of thing. The special bundles, which are bundles of papers that relate to one particular subject, and also the copies of letters sent out from the office. So not only people asking for things, but the response from the office going back to the person. So those are the kinds of records from the Colonial Secretary's papers that were microfilmed and indexed back in 1988. So more recently, microfilm copies have been available in our reading room and also at the 40 community access points around New South Wales. And more recently, again, we have copies of the Colonial Secretary's papers available on the Ancestry website. And more recently now, we've also got copies of those papers in our catalogue collection search. So in collection search, you can search for papers and you can also actually view them for free. So it's very exciting. And as part of that early bicentenary 1988 work that we did, we created the index to the Colonial Secretary's papers, and a lot of you would be familiar with this particular index on our website. So just to remind you, we'll go back and have a little look at that earlier index now. So where we've come from and where we're going to. So back to the website, if we go to Colonial Secretary's papers, select the indexes and go to 1788 to 1825, you'll see an information page like this. So this page will tell you some information about the index, how the indexing work was done back in 1988 and onwards, what they included in the index and what was excluded from the index and why certain things weren't put into that index. And it's often because they were very faint and difficult to read. So if you want to look at the original text-only index, there's a link which I've circled there where say in red saying browse by name and subject here. So we're just going to do that first. So a lot of you will be familiar with this screen. The early index to the Colonial Secretary's papers functioned mainly as a name index. So you could look for the name of someone who was in the colony up before 1825. And if you found it, then you could see details about the papers that were there about that person. And there was also some subject work done as well. So you could look up a subject like nursing or coinage or Aboriginal people, that kind of thing, and you could see what would be listed there. Female factory parramatta, for example. And this is what would come up. So if I went to N and worked my way down to nurses, I would come up with a page that looks like this. So it would give me the heading, the date of the letter, details of what that piece of correspondence was about, and then the real number, the stroke number, which is like our library call number, and the page to be able to find that letter. or you could do it by name. And so here we've got the example of Patrick O'Hara, who came out on the Friendship in 1800, and in 1810 he sends in a petition, for the mitigation of sentence. So petitions to me are always one of the most exciting things to read. And what I've got here for you is a copy of that petition. And this gives us a lot of information about Patrick and where he's come from. So it tells us he came to the colony on the ship Friendship in 1800. And since that time, he's had an honest, sober and industrious character. He's 77 years of age at the time of writing the letter. He lived 18 years and 9 months in the 57th Regiment in the American War, and then he was in the 107th, and then he was invalided by General Hinton on the Isle of Wight. He did garrison duty in the Isle of Alderney, and then he was an outpensioner at Chelsea, and then went back to his native country of Ireland, and then travelled to Scotland, where his wife was. But there he accidentally fell into a misfortune, although he was perfectly innocent, and then sent to New South Wales. So he's petitioning now for a free pardon and his emancipation. And he looks up to Your Excellency, the Governor, as the fountain of mercy, and hopes that he would be graciously pleased to consider the petitioner's age, his long residence in New South Wales, his universal character, and he's hoping that the Governor will offer and make good his pardon, so that with the blessing of God, he may have the happiness of seeing his friends before he dies. What an amazing letter. It gives us almost a biography of Patrick O'Hara to that time. And this is just sitting there in the Colonial Secretary's papers, 1788 to 1825, waiting for us to find it. So now, as well as being able to look up letters the way I've just showed you, you can also go to our catalogue collection search. You can search by keyword, you can search by name. And once you're in collection search and you've found your entry, you can view and download a copy of the record as well. So the copies in collection search are not taken from the original. The letter I just showed you from Patrick O'Hara, that's a copy from the original, but the copies in collection search are taken from the microfilms. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. They will be black and white. And you can still browse the old index the same as before. So you've got two options now for searching the Colonial Secretary's papers. So very, very exciting. So when you go to search the papers in collection search, we can go back to our index page where we just were. So back to that page where we just went to the old index. If this time we search, click on that button at the top there, the red button, we'll go to the index and then to the catalogue. So here I've done a search on Patrick O'Hara. So I can see there's quite a few entries there. And then one of those entries relates to his petition for the mitigation of sentence. And I've just put the big blue arrow there. If I click on the red details link there on my right-hand side, that will take me to his entry in the catalogue. And what I see here are a few things. So I see Patrick O'Hara, I see description is petition for mitigation of sentence. I see all the same record numbers down the bottom there. I see per Friendship 1800, so I know it's him. And then in the image gallery, where I've also circled the little thumbnail of that record, we can click on that and we can actually view it online. So here we have that copy being viewed there in our catalogue. Amazing. Now I can also just do a search in the catalogue. So we can reach the catalogue from our homepage with the Sydney Opera House. There's a big search box, sorry, Sydney Harbour Bridge. There's a big search box under the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Type in Patrick O'Hara and click on the search button and it will take you to our catalogue. And so that's what I've done here. So I've just typed in Patrick O'Hara. I've come up with a list of entries of any record in the collection that shows Patrick O'Hara. What I'm going to do is filter down my search just to the Colonial Secretary's papers. So you can see I've circled there where I've ticked on the right-hand side, index to Colonial Secretary's papers, and then there's a box that says apply filters. So if I click in the index and then apply filters, it will just take it down to just show me the Colonial Secretary's index entries there, like so. And so again, I've circled that same document that we've looked at a couple of times now. And if I click on, and we can follow the records, to, the links through to that entry. The other thing I can do is also just to narrow down my search by typing in the search box up the top. So if I type Patrick O'Hara friendship, that will also get me to any entries in the catalogue that relate to Patrick O'Hara of the friendship. And again, that same entry is there. It's the top one this time, and I can go and view it that way. The other thing I can do is also, if I already knew the number of that entry, so our stroke number, our archives number, 4/1847, I can also type that in next to his name, and that can get me straight to that entry. So if, for example, you were looking at the browsable version we looked at first, and you wrote down your number, then you could go straight across here and type in that number and go straight to that entry, for example. So here we are again at the index entry page. We've still got those same things circled. And then we go back to the image viewer there, and you can see I've circled in the top right hand side just that little pop-out box. What that will do is take me to a larger version of that document, and from here, if I right click, I can then save a copy of that document to my computer, and then I can do what I want to do with it from then, and that will save as a JPEG image. So when you're searching in the catalogue, I'd suggest searching by name or subject. You can narrow down your search by filtering to the index to the Colonial Secretary's papers, as we did. You could also do name and the stroke number. We did that one, or name and the ship, or you could do name and another search term. So land, mitigation, convict, whatever. You can try to narrow down your search that way. And you can also widen your search. So you can look at more records if you liked, and you could search by subject. So you could search by nursing or Parramatta female factory or whatever, or you could do just a search by the stroke number, and that would show you all of the documents with that particular stroke number in that description. So that 4/1847. And the other thing you can do in the catalogue, of course, is pin and sort your favourites. And if you've actually logged in, you can actually keep your list of pinned items there. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Rob.
Okay, so my name's Robert Dooley. I'm the project officer that was tasked with getting the index into the catalogue. The second task was, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could also get the associated images with that. So look, I'll start with the images. So we worked with a third party to do this. We got them to map the images, associated images, to the index. We have a good success rate. We have about a 95% success rate. So those that aren't fully complete, so they fall into two categories. One could be that there are no images linked. If that's the situation, if there is within the index a page reference, but there is no image, that means it's one of those that have been missed. If you get in touch with us about that, we can certainly coordinate that to display. The second category is sometimes a very small percentage, but sometimes not all the images were connected. So once you have a look at the reference, there's a citation that says pages 2 and 3, but there's only page 2 on there. That means the third one hasn't been able to be linked at this time. But if you get in touch with us, we'll be able to coordinate that for you. The other thing I should flag about images is, as Emily mentioned, they are microfilmed from the microfilm. So they are black and white. The second thing I should flag is if there are within the citation more than 25 pages, so page 1 to 30, for example, That won't necessarily be online yet. What we decided to do was to bundle those. Okay, so bundle them all up together so that it's one PDF document that you can download. We are working through those. We're largely there, but it's just a matter of importing those now. So there's a couple exceptions to the rule, but 95% of them are linked and available for you at the moment. Now I'm just going to talk briefly about the index. So the index is enormous. It's 144,000 index entries. What we had to do is break those up. Okay, so we had to break it up from the browsable. That was our only version. And we had to map them to appropriate headings and then ingest that into our archival management system, which you will see within the catalog. So I'm just going to take you back to the beginning. So Emily's already flagged with you that there's two ways to search. So on the left-hand side, there is the collection search from the catalog, which you can put your search in. Equally, you can do it from the web page, which Emily showed you as well. Now, just a couple things. Emily showed you how to narrow down. Equally, you can narrow down by using that INX number. You'll see that in your top left-hand search field. So it says INX 99. That is the code for the Colonial Secretary's index. So if you incorporate that into any of your searches, you will get just as much, you will narrow your search down just to that index. So there's two ways to search it. What you get, and this is another thing that I've had to make some decisions around, on the left, you'll see the summary of this entry for Matthew Coates, and it doesn't give you a lot. It says the ship, the citation, the real, and the start date. But on the right-hand side, what we've had to do is, for the web page, we map directly from that catalogue to this other display. And this allows us to manipulate what you can see. So in this instance, the one on the right-hand side, there is the description. Now that's the champion of this index. If we want to know anything about Matthew Coates, what particular record we have, so this one says on the lists of convicts on board the Earl Cornwallis. So that narrows down what am I actually looking at, and then you can go on. So the next step, I just wanted to show you, so the challenge of getting the browsable index into the catalogue. Had to make some decisions. So on the right, you've got the browsable index, and on the left, you'll see what is now in the catalogue. I should flag here that nothing has changed. No bits of information have been updated or edited from that browsable version into the current index. What has changed is that we've done some different mapping. So where you've got the name, so Matthew Coates in this instance, that's just been broken up and mapped to name and surname. The next part is this sort of what I've identified as notes. So this instance, it's an alias, but it could be a C also reference, it could be a C reference, it could be a cross reference. That has all been mapped to the heading of notes, which is the second last one on the left-hand side. So in 1988, when this index was done, it was very much the intention was to see it as like it was a card index. So those cross-references that you would normally have seen in a card index went into this index in 1988, and as I said, nothing has changed. So they've also come across into the new one. The ship, so the per Earl Cornwallis, has been mapped to the ship heading. The date of arrival, the 1801, has gone to date of arrival. The dates have been flipped, so you can see that there was previously the year, month, and then day. That has been broken up into the standard that we would normally see now, so the 13th of the 10th, 1800. Then there's the champion of that index, that description, that has gone to the description, that's the third from the top on the left-hand side. And then we've broken up the next bit. So real, equally that could be fish, and they've got their own headings, so real number, and then the citation. So that's gone into square brackets and with the page number. So just to give you an idea of how we've broken it up and how we've mapped it, I just wanted to go through that in a bit more detail. So one of the real benefits of this is that previously, if you identified something that you wanted, you would have had to come into the reading room or one of the access centres, found the microfilm and accessed it. I studied history interstate, and I had a great, as a late teen, I had a great interest in the bushranger Michael Howe. I would have loved to have been able to look at the original correspondence associated with that bushranger, but at that time that wasn't available to me. Now it is. So if I put in the name Michael Howe, I would have got lots of entries for that person. But I want to only narrow it down. So I can build on that search, and Emily's touched on this before, but I can add the word bushranger and I'll get all the results. And you can see there that there are 8 results for that entry. So that's just a bit about narrowing your search. But it also is interestingly that it brings up a subject, and that's associated with Aboriginal peoples. This is one change that did happen from the previous index to the current index. We opted to change the term Aborigines to the term Aboriginal peoples. So that is something that is a little bit different. Moving along, I just wanted to go through, so looking at Aboriginal peoples, if you put that search in, you'll notice that down the very bottom, you'll see that there's 176 returns for that search. But just slightly above that, you'll see that there's 175 that have digitally available images. That one that doesn't is a cross-reference. So if I just have a look at that on your right-hand side now, that is the name, so subject Aboriginal peoples, and then there's a note. So that note says, see also Bathurst Magistrates, Canoes, Parramatta Native Institution, or under the name of individuals. Unlike the browsable index, where that would hyperlink to that exact entry if you clicked on it, this one doesn't. So you would need to go through and re-enter that search term. So let's do that. So if I wanted canoes, I would search for that as canoes, and this is the entry that I would get. The description says a description of Aboriginal canoes, including sketches. And you can see the images up there. There's some fantastic sketches of canoes there. But I wanted to bring your attention to the citation for this. So if you see the highlighted citation, it's SZ8, pages 26, 28, and 33. They're the pages that are specifically related to canoes. But in this instance, you may say to me, oh, okay, I would really like to know what is on page 27, what's on page 29, to give it some more context around that. So if we were to do that, you can do it 2 ways. You can just go to the catalogue and you can search SZ8, which is on your right-hand side, and you'll get all 75 index entries related to that. But that's not going to tell you, that summary is quite limited from the catalogue. It's not going to tell you what the description is of those entries. So if you went back and did it through the web page, you put in SZ8. Now you should note here that the citation is not a field that displays, but it will search across it regardless. So if you put in SZ8, you will still get your 75 index entries, but this time you'll be able to go through and read the description associated with them, which I hope is a real benefit and helps you narrow down what you want. Now you may then say to me, look, Rob, I would really like to know, this SZ8 looks like a really interesting volume. What's actually in it? Can I read the whole thing in context? So what we're doing slowly, but hopefully getting there. Yeah, so I'll just go back to the previous slide. Emily's just informed me that it was a bit difficult to hear. Hopefully that's fixed now, and I'm just looking for a thumbs up from Emily. Okay, so I will keep going and hopefully you can hear me. So let's just say that you wanted to look at the whole volume of SZ8. You can go through and you can put in SZ8 into our catalogue. It will bring it up, so it will give you the whole item, citation, and then it will give you a description. And in this instance, you can actually download the whole volume and then you can look through the volume and see it in context. Yes, so look, I hope that's been helpful and that gives you some context around how this project's been done. It's been a really interesting project and I just really hope that it's useful and people are allowed to just to jump in, have a look, see whether the reference or the index entry that they're looking for is actually relevant to your inquiry, and then you can expand that and grow on that as well. So I'll hand back to you, Emily, just to wrap up.
Just what we wanted to remind you of was, if you want to find more about the Colonial Secretary's guides, papers, go back to our guides on the website. So back to the very beginning where we clicked on the Colonial Secretary button, and you'll see there's a lot of different guides and stories and things connected with the Colonial Secretary's records. And you'll find out a lot more information. There is so much information there about the Colonial Secretary, his office, how it started, the records that were created, and so forth. And then just finally, what to take away from today. The Colonial Secretary's papers for that 1788 to 1825 are the most comprehensive source of New South Wales colonial government records for the period. They certainly get better after 1810, when Macquarie was the governor. He revolutionised and fixed up a lot of the record keeping, and so we have a lot more records from Macquarie's day onwards, but we certainly do have material from earlier. You can still search and browse the index the same way you always have, but we hope that what we've done by adding both the index entries and the documents themselves to collect and search is that we've started to enhance that experience for you. And, it just comes into play when you think about the fact that you can then just search for a name and the names will come up in the Colonial Secretary's papers for that time period, the convict database, probate packets, all of those things, or you can search in one place. So it's really a huge move forward. We're really grateful to Rob for all the weeks and weeks and weeks of work that he's spent sitting there trying to work out how to list the entries and how they should show in collection search and how to match the picture, the thumbnail, the image to the record and all of that. It's taken weeks and weeks, and it's been years in our list of wishes that we'd like to have in the collection. So we're so grateful that it's finally here. So thank you very much for your time and attention today.